No one notices Delaney Marsh in the halls of Tidewater Naval Medical Center. She is the new nurse, the one who takes a wrong turn toward the supply room, the one who lowers her eyes when Dr. Preston Hale corrects her in front of everyone for a mistake that was never hers to begin with. But the hospital does not know that her silence is training, not shyness. When a Navy Admiral's sister is rushed in bleeding from a gunshot wound, in the middle of total chaos, it is Delaney who steps between the patient and the second shot, the one nobody saw coming. The hands that used to shake while holding a clipboard now stop bleeding with a calm that chills everyone watching. The military protection team sent to guard the survivor notices something is wrong. This nurse moves like she has done this before, under fire. And when men infiltrate the hospital posing as federal agents, ready to finish what they started, it becomes clear that Delaney is not who anyone thought she was. Her past is about to catch up with her, right there in the hole she thought she could disappear into. If this story pulled you in, hit the like button and subscribe. Silent badges. Stories right now, because Delaney's past is not finished with her yet, and once it catches up, nothing in that hospital will look the same again. Hands that don't shake. Tidewater Naval Medical Center smelled like bleach and burnt coffee at 6 in the morning, and Delaney Marsh had already been awake for 3 hours. She stood at the edge of the nurse's station with her badge clipped crooked and her scrubs a size too big, the fabric bunching at her waist where a belt should have been. Bright blue standard issue, washed so many times the color had gone soft. She kept her shoulders curved forward and her chin low, the posture of someone trying to take up less space than she actually needed. It was a posture she had practiced. Her hair was pulled back in a plain low ponytail, dirty blonde going light brown at the ends, a few strands escaping near her temple. Grey-blue eyes tracked the hallway without lifting fully to meet anyone's gaze. A thin scar sat just above her left eyebrow, pale and old, easy to miss unless someone was looking for it. Nobody was looking for it. She had caught her own reflection in the darkened window of an empty exam room on her way in that morning, the way she sometimes did before a shift, checking herself the way a person checks a uniform before an inspection. 5'4" in flat shoes, scrubs hanging loose at the shoulders, the kind of frame most people's eyes slid right past on their way to someone taller, someone louder. She had built that reflection on purpose, the same way she had once built other things on purpose, and most mornings it held without effort. This morning it had taken a little more work than usual, though she could not have said why. Marsh, Doctor. Preston Hale said her name like it was something he had stepped in. He was tall in the way that made hospital corridors feel narrower, silver at the temples, a white coat pressed so sharp it looked armored, chief of surgery, and proud of every syllable of the title. He carried a tablet in one hand and irritation in the other. The Callahan chart, room 214, it's missing intake vitals from 4 this morning. I logged those at 4:11, Dr. Hale. Delaney kept her voice even, quiet. They should be under the second entry, not the first. The system glitched and split the file. I don't have time to hunt through split files because a night nurse can't work a keyboard. He said it loud enough for the 2 residents behind him to hear, loud enough for the older woman waiting by the vending machine to look up. This is exactly the kind of sloppiness that gets people killed in this building. Do you understand that? Delaney's hands resting on the counter went still in a way that looked like fear. It was not fear. It was control. There was a difference, and only she knew it. I understand, Dr. Hale, she said. I'll flag the system error so it doesn't happen again. He was already walking away, tablet under his arm, white coat snapping around the corner like a door closing. The residents exchanged a look, and one of them, a younger man named Osei, gave her an apologetic shrug before following his boss. The woman by the vending machine went back to her coffee. Nobody said anything else. Delaney exhaled slowly through her nose and pulled the split file back up herself, merged it in under 2 minutes, and moved on to her next patient. This was the job, not the medicine, the disappearing. She had chosen Tidewater because it sat 2 hours from anywhere she used to matter, because the pace of a mid-sized naval hospital gave her enough structure to feel useful without asking questions she could not answer. Nobody here knew her real service record. Nobody here knew the tattoo hidden beneath the inside of her left forearm, small, faded on purpose, a coordinate string that meant nothing to anyone except the 11 people who had once shared it with her. Nobody here knew about the 2 thin scars across her knuckles, or the longer one along her right forearm that she told people came from a kitchen accident. Nobody asked twice. People rarely did, when a person made herself small enough. At 9 that morning, she went to check on a boy in Bay 6, 8 years old, admitted for a fractured wrist that had turned out to be more complicated than the ER doctor first thought. His name was Milo, And he was terrified of the splint, terrified of the room. Terrified in the specific silent way that children get when the adults around them are too busy to notice. Delaney knelt at his bedside so they were eye level. "Hey, I heard you've got the bravest wrist in the building," Milo sniffled. "It doesn't feel brave." "That's how you know it is. Brave doesn't feel like anything special while it's happening. It just feels like doing the next thing." She adjusted his blanket, checked his IV line with hands that moved fast and sure, the kind of competence she usually hid in front of adults. In front of a scared kid, she let a little of it show, because children never asked where the skill came from. "You want to know a secret?" He nodded. "I get scared plenty too, I just don't let my hands know about it." Milo laughed, a small hiccup of a sound, and some of the tension went out of his shoulders. Delaney stayed 2 extra minutes longer than her schedule allowed, and when she stood to leave, his mother caught her wrist gently at the door. "Thank you," the woman said. The other nurse barely looked at him. "He's easy to look at," Delaney said, and meant it, and left before the moment could turn into anything that required more of her than she was willing to give. She glanced back once from the hallway and saw Milo showing his sticker to a stuffed rabbit propped against his pillow, narrating the whole ordeal to it in the serious tone of a boy who considered the rabbit a fellow survivor. Priya caught her at the supply closet 20 minutes later, arms full of extra blankets she clearly did not need, which meant she wanted to talk. Priya Nair had been at Tidewater for 6 years, had a laugh that carried down 2 hallways, and had appointed herself Delaney's unofficial work friend on Delaney's second day, whether Delaney wanted one or not. "You know Hale timed that lecture this morning," Priya said, dumping the blankets on a shelf that did not need them either. 7:42 exactly. He does it every Tuesday because Tuesday is when the board reviews department metrics, and nothing makes him feel powerful like yelling at somebody before his own performance review. It's practically a ritual. I've started a calendar. A calendar. A calendar, Delaney. I'm 2 humiliations away from putting stickers on it, one for every time he says the word sloppiness like it personally wounds him. Priya leaned against the shelving, studying her with the kind of look that came from 6 years of reading people at their worst moments. "You never fight back, though. Not really. You just take it and go quiet and fix whatever he's mad about like it's nothing. Every single time, like you've had practice at swallowing worse than this. Most people either cry in the supply closet or start applying somewhere else within a month. I don't have anywhere else I need to be. That's either the saddest thing you've ever said to me or the most suspicious." Priya narrowed her eyes, half joking, half not. Nobody's that calm about being humiliated in public unless they've either given up completely or they just don't care what Preston Hale thinks of them. And honestly, with you, I can't tell which one it is. "Maybe it's both," Delaney said, and let just enough of a smile through that Priya laughed and let it go, the way she always did when Delaney gave her nothing solid enough to hold on to. "Fine, keep your secrets," Priya said, hefting the blankets back up, though she still had no use for them. "But if Hale ever actually fires you over a chart glitch, I'm organizing a mutiny. I've already got 2 nurses on board. Osei folds under pressure, but he's in spirit." "Noted," Delaney said. "I'll let you know if I need the mutiny." It was the closest anyone at Tidewater had come to guessing the truth, and Delaney had walked away from it laughing. By early afternoon, the hospital had settled into its normal rhythm, the low hum of monitors and gurney wheels, and the particular hush of a Tuesday with no disasters scheduled. Delaney ate a granola bar standing up at the med station and watched the security monitor out of habit, the one that showed the ambulance bay and the front entrance. She always watched the entrances. She had watched entrances for longer than she had been a nurse. A black SUV idled in the visitor lot for 11 minutes around 1:30, longer than any normal visitor idled, and Delaney noted it the way she noted everything, filing it away without letting it show on her face. It pulled out before she could decide whether it meant anything. 2 floors up, a maintenance worker propped open a fire door that should have stayed locked, and she made a mental note to mention it to facilities before the end of her shift, the kind of small correction that had become reflex rather than duty. None of it amounted to anything by itself. She had learned a long time ago that nothing ever did, right up until the moment it all did at once. It was 2:47 in the afternoon when the first radio call came through. Multiple gunshot wound, civilian female, ETA 4 minutes, security detail inbound. The floor changed instantly. Charge nurse barking assignments, 2 attendings moving toward the trauma bay. Dr. Hale striding out of a consult room already pulling on gloves, his voice sharp and commanding in the specific way that photographed well, but did not always translate to speed. Delaney fell into position at Bay 2 without being told, because Bay 2 was closest to the ambulance doors, and because some part of her body had already made the calculation before her mind caught up to it. The doors burst open at 2:51. The ambulance bay doors slammed against their rubber stops hard enough to bounce, and for a moment the sound alone silenced half the floor. Cold air rolled in behind the gurney, carrying the metallic smell of blood and the sharper smell of gun smoke that had not fully cleared from the fabric of the paramedics' jackets. Somewhere behind them, out past the bay doors, a siren was still cycling down, and a second vehicle, black, unmarked, screeched into the loading zone hard enough to leave rubber on the concrete. The woman on the gurney was maybe 40, dark hair matted with blood, a hospital blanket doing almost nothing against the wound in her lower abdomen. 2 paramedics were shouting vitals. Behind them, 4 men in dark tactical gear moved with the gurney like a wall, faces blank, eyes constantly scanning. Not hospital security, not local police, something else. Grace Whitcomb, 41, GSW to the lower right abdomen, BP dropping. We've got a second entry wound to the left shoulder, one of the paramedics called out. She's the sister of Admiral Whitcomb. We need a trauma team right now. The trauma bay went loud in the way emergencies always did. A dozen voices layered over monitors and orders, and for 3 full seconds, nobody moved fast enough. Dr. Hale was shouting for imaging that would take 10 minutes they did not have. A resident froze at the sight of the abdominal wound, hands hovering unsure. The bleeding was not stopping. Grace Whitcomb's eyes were starting to lose focus, her lips going pale, her breath turning shallow and fast, the unmistakable slide toward hemorrhagic shock. Delaney moved, not loud, not dramatic. She stepped past a resident who was still reaching for gloves, pressed 2 fingers to the wound site with a speed that made the nearest paramedic flinch, and applied direct pressure with a folded trauma pad in a motion so clean it looked rehearsed, because it was. Her other hand found the woman's pulse point without looking, counting, already calculating. She's losing pressure fast. Someone get me 2 units O-neg now, and I need hands on that shoulder wound before it catches up to the abdomen, Delaney said, and her voice had changed. Still quiet, but there was no question in it anymore, no apology. Marsh, step back. This is not your... Dr. Hale started. With respect, Doctor. If we wait for imaging, she bleeds out in the next 6 minutes. Delaney did not look up. Her hands stayed exactly where they needed to be, steady, unwavering, applying pressure at an angle that a civilian nurse should not have known instinctively. Someone clamp here, I need a second set of hands, not a debate. Something in her tone made the room obey before anyone decided to. For a moment, standing over the wound with her palms pressed flat and her sleeves pushed up past her elbows, Delaney was not in a hospital in Norfolk, Virginia. She was somewhere with worse lighting and no clean floor, somewhere with a radio crackling static in someone's ear and dust in the air instead of antiseptic. And the woman under her hands had a different name in that memory, a name that still surfaced sometimes at 3 in the morning when the hospital was quiet enough to let it through. She pushed the memory back down the way she had learned to, breathed once and stayed in the room she was actually standing in. Talk to me, Grace, Delaney said, low and steady, close enough to the woman's ear that it was just the 2 of them for a second inside all that noise. You're doing exactly what you need to do right now. Just keep breathing for me, in through the nose. Grace Whitcomb's eyes fluttered, found Delaney's face, and something in them settled, the particular calm that came from a patient deciding, on some animal level, to trust the person in front of her. Priya slid into position at the shoulder wound, without waiting to be asked twice, packing gauze with quick, competent hands. Her earlier jokes nowhere in her face now. Osei returned at a run with the O-neg, and behind him a second resident wheeled in the crash cart just in case, because nobody in that room was fully convinced yet that just in case would not become necessary. Dr. Hale hovered at the edge of the bay, his authority suddenly unmoored, watching a nurse he had humiliated 7 hours earlier direct the exact procedure that was keeping his patient alive. Clamp here, not there, Delaney said to the second resident, guiding his hand an inch to the left without looking away from Grace's face. Good. Hold that pressure. Don't ease up even when it feels like it's working. Especially then. Grace Whitcomb's blood pressure stabilized 14 minutes later, not because of imaging, not because of Dr. Hale's shouted instructions, but because a nurse nobody looked at twice had put both hands exactly where they needed to be and refused to move them. When it was over, when Grace Whitcomb had been wheeled towards surgery stable enough to survive it, Delaney stepped back from the gurney, and her hands were completely steady. She looked down at them like she was surprised to find them that way, then folded them behind her back out of old habit. The habit of making herself smaller again now that the danger had passed. Dr. Hale caught up to her near the scrub sink, his face somewhere between fury and confusion. You overrode a direct order in my trauma bay. I stopped a woman from bleeding out while you waited on imaging. That would have arrived after she was already gone." Delaney kept her eyes on the sink, scrubbing blood from her knuckles, and for the first time all day, she did not lower her voice to soften the words. "You never looked at me until I stepped in front of a bullet, Dr. Hale. Not once. Not this morning. Not any morning since I started here. Maybe it's worth asking what else you've been missing." He opened his mouth and closed it again, and for the first time since she had met him, Preston Hale had nothing to say. Behind him, near the supply cart, Priya and Osei had gone very still, the particular stillness of two people pretending not to listen while listening to every word. A younger nurse near the doorway had actually stopped mid-step, tray in hand, eyes wide. Word would move through the floor by shift change, the way it always did in hospitals, a story reshaping itself slightly with every telling, and by morning half of Tidewater would know that the quiet new nurse had put Preston Hale in his place in front of witnesses. Hale knew it too, and the knowledge sat on his face like something he could not swallow. That was when the four men in tactical gear stepped into the hallway outside the scrub room, and the tallest of them, a broad-shouldered man with a jaw like poured concrete and eyes that missed nothing, looked directly at Delaney with an expression she recognized immediately, because she used to wear it herself. It was not gratitude, it was recognition. "Ma'am," he said, voice low enough that only she and Hale could hear it. "Can I ask where you trained?" "Standard nursing program," Delaney said. "Why do you ask?" The man's eyes moved to her hands, still slightly damp from the sink, steady as stone. "Because those aren't a nurse's hands. That's battlefield training. I've seen hands like that before on the line, and I've only ever seen them shake afterward, not during." Delaney said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that silence was safer than a lie that could be checked. Behind Knox, the other three men in tactical gear had spread out along the corridor without seeming to move at all. One watching the elevator bank, one watching the stairwell door, one watching the window at the end of the hall, like it might grow legs and walk in on its own. It was the kind of positioning that came from repetition, not training manuals. Delaney recognized it the way a person recognizes a language they used to speak fluently and have not spoken in years for a long time. Her chest tightened for reasons that had nothing to do with fatigue. "Name's Knox," the man said, extending a hand that she shook briefly, professionally, betraying nothing. "I run protection detail for Admiral Whitcomb's family. That woman in there is his sister. And whatever you just did in that trauma bay, ma'am, I've watched combat medics do exactly that under fire and lose the fight anyway. You didn't lose it." "I got lucky," Delaney said. Knox's jaw tightened slightly, the look of a man who did not believe a word of it, but had decided for now to let it stand. "Sure," he said. "Lucky." He glanced once more at her forearm, where her sleeve had ridden up just enough during the trauma to expose the edge of a faded mark before she tugged it back down and something shifted behind his eyes, some private calculation clicking into place that he did not share out loud. He had seen marks like that exactly twice before in his career, both times on operators who no longer officially existed on any roster. "We'll be posting a detail outside her room for the next 72 hours. Standard procedure. Somebody tried to finish what that shooter started, and until we know who ordered it, everybody in this building stays sharp." "Understood," Delaney said. She walked away before he could ask another question, because she had already seen the way his eyes lingered on her arm, and some old instinct told her that the quiet life she had built at Tidewater had just developed its first crack. She found an empty supply room 3 doors down and gave herself 90 seconds, no more, because 90 seconds was what she allowed herself and had allowed herself for 2 years now. She locked the door, pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, and let the memory come all the way up instead of pushing it back down. Another trauma bay, a different name on a different chart. A teammate everyone called Bishop, who had bled out under her hands the way Grace Whitcomb almost had, except Bishop had not made it. And no amount of pressure or calm voice or steady hands had changed that outcome, because some wounds did not care how well trained the person treating them was. She had carried that failure home from 3 different countries, and it still found her sometimes in supply closets at naval hospitals in Virginia, uninvited, exact in its timing. Grace Whitcomb had lived. Bishop had not. Delaney had done the same thing both times, and only one of those times had been enough. She thought briefly of the letter she had never finished writing to Bishop's mother, still sitting unsent in a drawer back at her apartment. 3 years of drafts that never felt like they said enough. Some debts did not close just because time passed. They just went quiet for a while. She breathed out, unlocked the door, and put her face back together before she stepped into the hallway, because grief was a private thing and Tidewater Naval Medical Center was not a private place. By 6 that evening, the hospital had returned to something like its normal rhythm, though a heavier one now, threaded through with the presence of armed men standing too still at the end of hallways where visitors usually wandered freely. Delaney kept her head down and did her rounds, checked on Milo one more time before his mother took him home, with a cast and a sticker. He had picked himself, charted vitals, avoided Dr. Hale's eyes whenever their paths crossed near the nurses' station. At 8, on her way to a supply run, Delaney stopped outside Grace Whitcomb's recovery room, more out of habit than duty, and looked through the narrow window in the door. Grace was awake, pale but stable, an oxygen line under her nose, and when her eyes found Delaney through the glass, she raised 2 fingers off the blanket in something between a wave and a salute. Delaney did not go in. She lifted her own hand in return, held it a moment and moved on, because there was nothing else that needed saying between 2 women who had spent 14 minutes deciding together that one of them was not going to die that day. She told herself it was nothing. A coincidence. Knox was a professional trained to be suspicious of everyone, and suspicion was not the same as knowledge. But at 9:40 that night, while she was restocking the crash cart in Bay 2, a man in a grey suit approached the front desk, claiming to be a federal liaison assigned to Grace Whitcomb's case, flashing credentials too quickly for the desk clerk to read them properly, asking which room the patient had been moved to. Something about the way he held his shoulders, the way his eyes swept the hallway instead of the paperwork in front of him, made the back of Delaney's neck go cold, in a way it had not gone cold in over 2 years. She had seen that posture before, not on federal agents, on men who were hunting. Delaney set down the IV bag she was holding, and for the first time since she had arrived at Tidewater Naval Medical Center, she let her spine straighten completely, just for a moment, just long enough to watch the stranger's face and confirm what her instincts were already screaming. She moved toward the front desk without hurrying, the way a person walks when they do not want to be noticed walking with purpose. Up close, the man's credentials looked correct at a glance, laminated, embossed, a photograph that matched his face closely enough to pass a tired clerk at the end of a long shift. But the lanyard was too new. The edges of the card had not softened the way real ones did after months of clipping and unclipping, and his shoes, expensive, polished, were the wrong shoes for a man who claimed to have been driving since Washington. "I can help you find the right department," Delaney said, stepping in beside the desk clerk with an easy professional smile. "Which case number were you given?" "I don't need a case number, I need a room," the man said, and his eyes flicked to her badge, then away, dismissive, the practiced dismissal of someone used to hospital staff being background noise. "Whitcomb, female gunshot, admitted this afternoon." "I can look that up for you, sir, but I'll need your agency contact first." The desk clerk, a young man named Danny, reached for the visitor log with hands that had started to shake slightly, sensing something in the air that he could not name. "I don't answer to a hospital clerk," the man snapped. And for just a moment the Polish cracked, the voice underneath it harder, flatter, a voice that had given orders before and did not enjoy waiting on civilians. "I'll page the charge nurse to confirm your clearance," Delaney said. "Hospital policy, given the circumstances. It'll just take a moment." "That won't be necessary." His voice sharpened by exactly 1 degree, the kind of shift that would be invisible to someone who had not spent years learning to hear it. "I have federal authorization. I don't need to wait on hospital policy." "Of course," Delaney said, still smiling, already reaching beneath the desk for the phone that connected directly to hospital security, her thumb finding the panic extension by feel without looking down at the keypad. "I'll just need you to wait right here while I confirm." The man's eyes met hers for exactly 1 second too long, and in that second, something passed between them, an understanding neither of them said out loud. That she knew exactly what he was, and he had just realized she did. He turned and walked toward the exit at a pace that was almost casual, almost unhurried, the pace of a man choosing not to run because running would confirm everything. "Security to main entrance," Delaney said into the phone, her voice utterly level even as her pulse climbed. "Possible unauthorized individual, grey suit, exiting toward the ambulance bay, and someone alert the detail on Whitcomb's floor. Tell them Wraith says lock it down." The word left her mouth before she had time to stop it, a call sign she had not spoken aloud in over 2 years, and for a moment she stood frozen at the sound of her own voice using it. Down the hall, one of Knox's men turned his head sharply as if he had heard something in that word that did not belong to a nurse. He said something low into his own radio, too quiet for Delaney to catch, and his eyes found her across the length of the corridor and stayed there. No longer the neutral scan of a bodyguard, but the focused stare of a man who had just heard a ghost story confirmed. Knox appeared at the end of the hall a moment later, moving fast, his expression no longer curious. It was something closer to certainty. The overhead lights flickered once, the kind of flicker that meant nothing most nights and meant everything on a night like this one, and somewhere above them the building's intercom crackled to life with the flat, mechanical tone of a lockdown alert beginning to sound through every floor of Tidewater Naval Medical Center. Doors along the corridor began sealing themselves with a low mechanical hiss, one after another. A sound Delaney had heard before in places far from Virginia, and every one of them landed in her chest like a countdown. Somewhere in the building, an alarm bell began to ring in short, even pulses, and staff who had never heard it outside of drills started moving toward posted stations with the confused urgency of people who did not yet understand this was not a drill. Whatever had followed Grace Whitcomb into this hospital was not finished. And somewhere behind her careful posture and her two big scrubs, the woman she used to be was already calculating exits, head counts, and how fast she could reach the nearest phone, because Wraith was not a name she had planned on needing again. And it had just walked straight back into her life through the front doors of the hospital she had chosen precisely because nobody there was supposed to know it. The lockdown alarm kept pulsing through the ceiling speakers in short, even tones, and within 90 seconds, the wide corridor outside Grace Whitcomb's recovery floor had filled with hospital security, 2 uniformed Norfolk police officers who had been stationed at the front desk since the shooting, and 4 men in tactical gear who no longer looked like a protection detail standing around waiting for something to happen. They looked like a unit that had just been given a mission. Fluorescent lights along the corridor flickered once, twice, then steadied under the building's emergency power, and somewhere far below, faint enough that most people would have missed it entirely, came the low metallic groan of a heavy door being forced against its frame. Patients who could walk were being herded gently but firmly into interior rooms away from windows. A monitor alarm chirped from an empty bay, ignored in the sudden crush of movement. Delaney's pulse had settled into the same steady, almost meditative rhythm it always found in moments like this one, the rhythm that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with a body that had simply run out of room for panic a long time ago. Knox reached Delaney in 6 long strides, closing the distance between them, with the kind of speed that made nurses flatten themselves against the wall to get out of his way. "Wraith," he said, low, testing the word like it might not hold his weight. "That's not a name a civilian nurse pulls out of thin air during a lockdown call." "It's a name I heard on television once," Delaney said. "Bad reception, I panicked." "You didn't panic once today, and we both know it." Knox's eyes were hard, but there was no accusation in them, only urgency. "I don't have time to make you tell me the truth right now, and honestly, I don't think I need to. I need to know if you can help me clear this floor faster than my team can do it alone. Because whoever tried to finish Grace Whitcomb off this afternoon just breached the loading dock on the sub-level, and I have 22 patients between here and there who don't know what's coming." Delaney looked at him for exactly 1 second, long enough to make a decision she had been avoiding making for 2 years, one that felt heavier than any decision she had made since the day she signed her discharge papers. "The sub-level connects to central supply through a service corridor that isn't on the visitor maps," she said. "If they're moving up from there, they'll hit the stairwell by radiology before they hit an elevator. Because the elevators require badge access past the 2nd floor during lockdown, you want to cut them off at radiology, not chase them through the main hall." Knox's radio was already up at his mouth, relaying the information before she finished the sentence, and one of his men peeled off toward the stairwell without waiting for a second order. Down the corridor, a woman in a sharp grey blazer was moving toward them, with the brittle urgency of someone whose entire career depended on the next 10 minutes going a specific way. Deborah Crane, Vice President of Patient Affairs, had a laminate badge, a phone in each hand, and an expression that suggested she viewed the entire lockdown as a personal inconvenience scheduled specifically to ruin her quarter. "I need everyone off this floor who isn't cleared personnel," Crane said, arriving in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely contained panic. "Nurse Marsh, I was told you made an unauthorized transmission on the hospital security channel using some kind of code word. Do you have any idea what kind of liability that creates for this institution during an active incident?" "With respect, ma'am, right now liability isn't the concern," Knox said, not unkindly, but without room for negotiation. "Armed individuals are inside your building. I need every non-essential staff member cleared from this corridor, and I need this nurse to stay exactly where she is, because she just gave my team information that may have saved several lives in the next 5 minutes. I understand there's an emergency, Mr. Knox, but I also have a hospital to answer for in the morning, and unauthorized personnel issuing tactical instructions over hospital channels is exactly the kind of thing that ends up in a lawsuit deposition. Crane's voice had the brittle, over-rehearsed quality of someone who managed crises through paperwork rather than instinct, and who had clearly never had to manage one that involved gunfire. Nurse Marsh, I'm going to need you to stand down and return to your assigned unit immediately. She's not going anywhere, Knox said, his voice dropping half a register, quiet enough that it somehow carried more weight than if he had shouted. Ma'am, with all due respect, you can write whatever incident report you'd like once this building is secure. Right now I have 4 men clearing floors and a nurse who apparently knows this facility better than your own security team does. I'm not overriding that for a liability conversation. Crane's mouth opened and closed, caught between institutional instinct and a man twice her size wearing body armor. This is still my hospital, she said, quieter now, but not backing down. I want a full incident report on my desk the moment this is resolved. And Nurse Marsh, you and I are going to have a very serious conversation about chain of command. Understood, Delaney said, and meant every word of it, because she had learned a long time ago that agreeing with people in charge cost nothing when the building was on fire and everything could be sorted out afterward, and Deborah Crane, whatever else she was not the emergency that mattered tonight. Crane's heels clicked away down the hall, phone already pressed to her ear, already rehearsing whatever version of this story would protect her position by morning, her legal pad tucked under one arm like a shield she had not gotten to use. Priya appeared at Delaney's elbow a moment later, breathless, a spare radio in her hand that she must have taken from the crash cart room. Pediatric wing is still not cleared, she said. Milo's mother called the front desk 20 minutes ago. They got stuck trying to leave when the doors sealed. They're both still up there. I tried to get security to prioritize it, but they said the west stairwell is where they're concentrating. Something in Delaney's chest went cold and still at once, the particular stillness that used to come right before the worst parts of every mission she had ever run. The west stairwell is exactly where those men are headed, she said, mostly to herself, already moving. Knox caught the shift in her immediately, the change from calm cooperation to something sharper, faster, entirely focused. Talk to me. There's an 8-year-old and his mother trapped on the pediatric floor directly above the stairwell your men are about to funnel those shooters into, Delaney said. If this goes the way these things usually go, that stairwell becomes the fastest route up, not down, and pediatrics is the first floor with an easy door to kick, and the mother told Priya they've been stuck up there for 20 minutes already, with no update from anyone. How do you know that's how these things usually go? Because I've been on both sides of a stairwell like that one, Knox. More times than I want to count, and I'm not about to let it happen in a children's ward. Her voice had dropped into something entirely unfamiliar to the version of herself that Tidewater had known for 3 months, low, exact, carrying an authority that made even Knox straighten slightly. I need 2 of your men on the pediatric stairwell door right now, not to intercept, to seal it and hold. And I need someone with eyes on the loading dock feed so we know how many we're actually dealing with. Knox did not argue. He barked 2 names into his radio and men moved. Delaney was already walking fast, toward the back stairs that ran behind the elevator shafts, the ones almost nobody used, because they required a key card most staff had never bothered to activate. Hers had been activated since her first week, quietly, without anyone asking why a new nurse wanted full facility access. Old habits. Where are you going? Knox called after her. To get a child and his mother off a floor that's about to become a corridor for armed men, Delaney said, not slowing down. You have a floor to clear. I have somewhere to be. He hesitated for exactly 1 second, the last second in which he still thought of her as a nurse who had gotten lucky once in a trauma bay. And then he made a decision of his own. Torres with her, he barked into the radio, and one of his men peeled away from the group and fell into step half a pace behind Delaney, rifle low and ready, following a civilian nurse toward danger without a single question about why he was doing it or where exactly they were headed. The stairwell smelled like cold concrete and dust, the emergency lighting throwing everything into a flat amber glow that made shadows stretch too long across the landings. Delaney took the stairs 2 at a time, Torres matching her pace without complaint, and somewhere below them, faint but unmistakable, came the metallic clatter of a door being forced. They're already in the stairwell, Torres said. Then we go up faster than they do, Delaney said, and did not look back to see if he was keeping up, because some part of her already knew he would. Their footsteps echoed off the concrete in a rhythm that felt for a moment exactly like every stairwell she had ever cleared in every building on every continent. She was not allowed to name out loud anymore, and she caught herself counting landings the way she used to count them then. 1, 2, 3. An old habit surfacing without permission. Torres kept pace half a step behind her shoulder, rifle low, eyes constantly flicking to the landing above and the darkness below in the particular rhythm of a man who had done this enough times that his body no longer needed instructions from his brain to do it correctly. "You always move like this?" Torres asked, low between breaths. "Only on days that start with public humiliation and end with gunfire," Delaney said. "Statistically, it's rare." A faint huff of breath from Torres might have been a laugh under different circumstances. It wasn't quite one now, but it was close enough to remind her that even in the middle of something like this, there was still room for a person to be a person. "Rare or not, you're the calmest person I've worked a stairwell with in a long time, and that includes some of the guys on my own team," Torres added. "Just so you know, that's a compliment, in case it didn't land as one." "It landed fine," Delaney said. "I don't get many of those in scrubs." They reached the pediatric floor landing 40 seconds later, breathing hard, and Delaney badged through the service door into a hallway, lit only by the dim glow of monitors and nightlights. The whole ward eerily silent, except for the low hum of machines and the muffled sound of a child crying somewhere behind a closed door. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse Delaney didn't recognize was crouched behind a supply cart, with a phone pressed silently to her ear, eyes wide, clearly on with hospital security, and getting no answers fast enough for her liking. Delaney signaled for quiet without breaking stride, and the nurse nodded, understanding immediately that whatever was happening had already found its way onto this floor in spirit, if not yet in person. She found Milo and his mother in the family lounge at the end of the hall, the mother pressed into a corner with her arms wrapped around her son, both of them frozen in the particular terror of people who had heard an alarm they did not understand and had nowhere safe to go. A television mounted in the corner was still playing a muted cartoon, absurd and cheerful against the fear in the room, nobody having thought to turn it off in the scramble. "It's Nurse Marsh," Delaney said quietly, stepping into the doorway with her hands visible, her voice pitched exactly the way it had been that morning at Milo's bedside. "You remember me, bravest wrist in the building." Milo's mother let out a breath that was almost a sob. "They said there are people in the building with guns. Nobody would tell us anything." "I know. I need you both to move with me right now, quickly and quietly, and I need Milo to be brave one more time today, okay? Can you do that for me?" Milo nodded, small and scared, but he nodded, and that was enough. "Stay behind me, hand on my shoulder. Don't let go until I tell you it's safe," Delaney told the mother and helped her to her feet, keeping her own body angled slightly between the family and the open hallway out of instinct rather than instruction. Torres took point at the doorway, scanning the hall in both directions with the flat, professional calm of a man who had done this in far worse places than a pediatric ward, and Delaney guided the mother and son toward the far stairwell, the one on the opposite side of the building, from wherever the gunfire had come from, moving them fast and low past darkened patient rooms and empty nurses' stations. They were halfway down the hall when a door at the far end burst inward, and a man in dark clothing stepped through it, weapon raised, sweeping the corridor with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done this before, and expected no resistance from a hospital full of civilians. He had not expected Torres. 2 shots cracked through the corridor, deafening in the enclosed space, and Torres returned fire in a controlled burst that put the man down hard against the wall, weapons skittering across the tile floor. The silence afterward was almost worse than the noise, a ringing stillness broken only by the muted cartoon still playing somewhere behind them and the frantic thud of Delaney's own heartbeat in her ears. Milo's mother screamed and pulled her son's face into her shoulder, and Delaney was moving before the echo had finished bouncing off the walls, shoving the 2 of them bodily into the nearest supply alcove and putting her own body between them and the hallway without stopping to think about whether that was the smart thing to do. "Clear," Torres called, voice tight but steady, already moving to check the downed shooter. "One down, there may be a second. They usually run in pairs on jobs like this." Delaney's pulse was hammering, not from fear, but from the old familiar clarity that came when the noise finally matched the danger she had been braced for all along. She checked Milo over his mother's shoulder, quick, clinical, confirming he was unhurt beyond the shaking that any 8-year-old would have after gunfire in a hallway, running her hands lightly over his arms and back, the way she had been trained to check for injuries a person was too frightened to notice in themselves. "You did great," she told him, and meant it completely. The bravest wrist in the building just added the bravest hallway to the list. Milo's mother was crying quietly now, the kind of crying that came after fear had nowhere left to go, and she gripped Delaney's sleeve with white-knuckled fingers. Thank you, I don't know what we would have—" "You don't have to know," Delaney said gently. "You just have to keep walking with me. We're almost there." They reached the far stairwell without further incident, and Delaney handed the two of them off to a pair of Norfolk police officers stationed at the ground-floor exit, watching until she was certain they were safely clear before turning back toward the stairs, because the building was not secure yet, and somewhere inside it, Grace Whitcomb was still a target. Torres fell in beside her again, breathing hard. Blood not his own streaked faintly across one forearm from where he had checked the downed shooter's pulse and found none worth reporting. "Command wants confirmation on your ID," Torres said, glancing sideways at her as they climbed back toward the main floors. "Knox is calling it in. Says whoever cleared that hallway with him wasn't reading off a nursing manual. Tell Knox I appreciate the professional courtesy of asking me directly instead of running my file behind my back," Delaney said. And there was an edge in it now, not quite anger, something closer to exhaustion. The specific fatigue of a woman who had spent 2 years building a wall and had just watched it crack down the middle in the space of one afternoon. "For what it's worth," Torres said, "whatever you used to be, you're good at this." "I used to be a lot of things," Delaney said, and did not elaborate, and Torres, to his credit, did not ask her to. He kept pace beside her the rest of the way up. Quiet now. The easy quiet of a man who had decided somewhere on that stairwell that he trusted her completely and did not need a file to confirm it. They emerged back onto the main corridor to find the situation largely contained. The second shooter Torres had predicted had been intercepted near radiology, exactly where Delaney's directions had sent Knox's team, taken down without further injury to staff, and the lockdown alarm had shifted from its urgent pulsing tone to the steadier, calmer signal that meant all clear was imminent. Dr. Hale stood near the nurse's station looking pale and shaken in a way Delaney had never seen on him before, his expensive composure entirely stripped away by 20 minutes of a crisis that had nothing to do with surgical technique and everything to do with the kind of danger no medical degree prepared a person for. Deborah Crane was on her phone again, but her voice had lost its earlier sharpness, replaced by the careful, measured tone of someone already rehearsing a statement for the hospital board. Knox found Delaney near the scrub room, the same spot where he had first questioned her hours earlier, and this time there was no ambiguity left in his expression at all. "Admiral Whitcomb is en route," he said. "He wants to speak with the nurse who directed my team through this building like she'd walked it 100 times before today. And for what it's worth, ma'am, I already ran what little I have. There's no service record under the name Delaney Marsh anywhere in any federal database I have clearance to see, which either means you're the most unremarkable civilian I've ever met, or it means somebody erased you very carefully a long time ago." "Careful conclusions, Knox," Delaney said, but there was no real fight left in her voice. "I've made my career on careful conclusions," Knox said. "You want to tell me now, or you want to wait for the Admiral to ask?" "I'd rather say it once to everyone who needs to hear it than explain myself twice in one night," Delaney said. "I've spent enough of today explaining myself already." "Fair," Knox said, and something in his voice suggested he respected the answer more than he would have respected an easier one. Delaney looked down the hall toward Grace Whitcomb's room, toward the family lounge where Milo and his mother had huddled in terror 20 minutes earlier, toward the scrub sink where she had scolded Dr. Hale that morning with words she had been swallowing for 3 months, and felt something inside her, some old tired weight, finally shift. "Give me an hour," she said, "and get everyone who needs to hear it in the same room, because I'm only doing this once." The conference room on the 3rd floor was small, windowless, built for board meetings and budget reviews, rather than the kind of conversation that was about to happen inside it. Admiral James Whitcomb arrived 40 minutes later in a plain grey suit rather than a uniform, a broad-shouldered man in his early 60s with his sister's same steady grey eyes, and he walked into the room like a man used to, rooms rearranging themselves around him, though tonight he looked older than his file photo. The particular exhaustion of someone who had nearly lost a sibling to a bullet meant for someone else entirely. Knox stood near the door. Torres and 2 other members of the detail waited in the hallway. Dr. Hale sat stiffly at the far end of the table, still pale, still shaken, flanked by Deborah Crane, who had brought a legal pad and a lawyer's careful silence. Priya had been asked to join as a witness to the hospital's operational response, and she sat beside Delaney with the wide, Quiet eyes of someone finally about to learn the answer to a question she had been asking for months, without knowing it. "Miss Marsh," Admiral Whitcomb said, taking the seat across from her, "my sister is alive tonight because someone in this hospital knew exactly what to do when everyone around her froze. Then, a few hours later, that same someone directed my protective detail through a building under active threat, with the kind of tactical precision that does not come from a nursing degree, whatever program you attended. I would like to know who I am actually thanking." Delaney folded her hands on the table, the same hands that had been trembling that morning under Dr. Hale's lecture, steady now in a way that no longer needed to hide itself. She glanced once at Priya, who gave the smallest possible nod, the kind that said, "Whatever you're about to say, I'm still your friend when you're done saying it," and something in Delaney eased slightly at that, enough to let the next words come easier than she expected. "My name is Delaney Marsh," she said. "That part is true. What isn't public record is that 4 years ago I served as a combat medic attached to a joint special operations task force, cross-trained and embedded with a naval special warfare unit for 18 months on deployments I'm not able to discuss in detail in this room. My call sign in that unit was Wraith." She let the word settle before continuing, watching Hale's face shift from confusion to something closer to disbelief. "I left the service after a mission that went wrong in a way that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with circumstances none of us could control. A teammate died under my hands the same way your sister very nearly did today, Admiral. Except that time, no amount of skill was enough to change the outcome. I came to Tidewater because I wanted a version of this work with fewer stakes attached to it. I did not expect the stakes to find me here." The room was silent except for the low hum of the air conditioning. Priya's hand found Delaney's under the table, brief, steadying, and Delaney let herself take it for exactly as long as she needed to before letting go. 18 months embedded is not a training rotation, Miss Marsh," the Admiral said quietly. "That's operational trust most medics never earn in an entire career. What happened, if you're willing to say more?" "We were extracting a wounded operator under fire in conditions I'd rather not describe in detail," Delaney said, her voice steady but quieter now. "I stabilized him the same way I stabilized your sister today, hands on the wound. Voice in his ear. Everything by the book and then some. He didn't make it. It wasn't a failure of skill, Admiral. Sometimes the body has already decided something the training can't undo. I carried that home with me anyway, because that's what carrying it looks like, whether or not it's fair." "The 2 men in the building this afternoon," Knox said from the doorway, quiet, filling the silence before it stretched too long. "We've confirmed they were private contractors, hired through at least 2 shell layers we're still tracing. Early read suggests they were sent to finish what the original shooter started, silencing your sister as a witness to something she saw before the shooting, sir. That's a separate briefing for a separate room, but I want it on record that without Nurse Marsh's directions, my team does not clear that building as fast as we did, and there is a strong chance we lose civilians on the pediatric floor tonight, including a child." "What did Grace see?" the Admiral asked. And for the first time since he had entered the room, something in his composure cracked, the professional stillness of a career officer briefly giving way to the fear of a brother. "We don't have full confirmation yet, sir, but preliminary intelligence suggests she witnessed a financial transaction between a defense contractor and a mid-level procurement official the week before the shooting, one she wasn't supposed to be anywhere near," Knox said. "It's possible the original shooting wasn't random violence at all. It's possible it was meant to look that way." The Admiral absorbed this with the flat, controlled stillness of a man who had received worse news in worse rooms, but Delaney saw the muscle tighten along his jaw all the same. "Then this isn't finished," he said. "No, sir," Knox said. "It isn't. But it's a great deal further from finished for whoever ordered it than it was an hour ago. Because now they know it failed twice in one day, and they know exactly which hospital made that happen." Dr. Hale's jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke, his voice smaller than Delaney had ever heard it. "I called you a sloppy night nurse this morning in front of half my staff." "You did," Delaney said without cruelty, without triumph, simply stating a fact that no longer had the power to humiliate her the way it once had. "You never looked at me until I stepped in front of a bullet, Dr. Hale. I said that to you once today already. I'm not sure you heard it the first time." "I heard it," Hale said quietly. "I just didn't understand what it meant." "Most people don't until it's spelled out for them," Delaney said. "That's not really an excuse, Dr. Hale. It's just an explanation." Hale looked down at his own hands on the table, surgeon's hands, steady and well-trained, and for the first time in longer than he could probably remember, entirely useless in the room he was sitting in. "For 3 months I've been telling myself that the way I run my floor is what keeps people alive here. Precision, standards, no room for excuses." He exhaled slowly. I watched a woman I dismissed as sloppy save my patient today with hands steadier than mine have ever been in an OR, and then walk into a live shooting and do it again. I don't know what to do with that except admit I was wrong, which is not something I do gracefully, as you may have noticed. Noted, Delaney said, and there was something almost gentle in it now. Deborah Crane cleared her throat, still holding her legal pad like a shield. Admiral, I want to assure you that Tidewater takes the safety of all patients extremely seriously, and any procedural gaps that contributed to today's breach will be— Ms. Crane, the Admiral said, not unkindly, but with the flat finality of a man who had run out of patience for institutional language an hour ago, your hospital's chief of surgery insulted the woman who saved my sister's life in front of witnesses this morning, and your administration was preparing to suspend her during an active shooting incident because she used a radio call sign correctly. I would strongly suggest reviewing your procedures rather than defending them to me tonight. Crane's mouth closed. She did not attempt to finish the sentence. I'd also like to know, the Admiral continued, why an 8-year-old and his mother were still stranded on a pediatric floor 40 minutes into an active lockdown, when hospital protocol supposedly calls for that wing to be cleared first in any emergency scenario. That's— Crane started and stopped, glancing at the legal pad as if it might supply an answer that did not exist there. We'll be reviewing the evacuation sequence. See that you do, the Admiral said, and turned back to Delaney before Crane could attempt to recover any further ground. The Admiral turned back to Delaney, and something in his expression softened into the particular gratitude of a man speaking to the person who had kept his family whole. Whatever rank you held, whatever unit patch you used to wear, you don't owe this hospital an explanation for choosing to leave it behind, Miss Marsh. But I owe you a debt I don't know how to repay properly, so I'm going to ask you plainly. What do you want out of tonight? Delaney thought about the question longer than she expected to. She thought about Bishop, about the unfinished letter in her drawer, about Milo's stuffed rabbit hearing the whole story of his bravest hallway, about Priya's calendar of humiliations that would never need another sticker added to it, about the particular hard-won piece of a life built small on purpose that had just been blown open in a single afternoon. She thought, too, about the version of herself that had walked into Tidewater 3 months ago, convinced that disappearing was the only way to survive what she had carried out of her last deployment, and how tired that version of herself had been. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with holding a shape that never quite fit. That woman had wanted invisibility. This one, sitting at this table with her hands finally still for reasons that had nothing to do with hiding, wanted something else now, something that felt less like retreat and more like a choice. I don't want a medal, Admiral, and I don't want my file reopened for the news, she said. I want to keep doing this work here as a nurse, because it turns out I'm good at the parts of it that don't require a uniform, too. But I'd like Tidewater to let me help build a real trauma response protocol for mass casualty events, something better than what we had today. And I'd like the people on this floor to be trained properly instead of frozen the next time something like this happens, because today it was luck as much as skill that kept this from being much worse. Done, the Admiral said without hesitation, and looked pointedly at Crane, who nodded quickly enough to suggest she understood exactly whose authority now outranked hers in that room. Dr. Hale stood, slowly, and for a long moment said nothing at all. The silence of a proud man, reorganizing everything he thought he understood about the people beneath him on an organizational chart. I'd like to help with that training program, he said finally, quiet, none of his usual polish left in it. If you'll let me. I've spent 15 years building a reputation on precision in the operating room, and today I watched precision that had nothing to do with any operating room save a woman's life twice. So I'd like to learn what that actually looks like instead of just being humbled by it. Delaney studied him for a moment, weighing 2 years of small daily corrections against one long, brutal day that had finally taught him something no lecture from her ever could. We'll see how you do in the first session, Dr. Hale, she said, and there was the faintest, genuine warmth in it now, the shape of forgiveness that had not fully arrived yet but was, for the first time, on its way. That's fair, Hale said, and for the first time since Delaney had met him, he did not try to have the last word. Before the meeting fully broke, a nurse knocked and leaned in to let the Admiral know that Grace Whitcomb was awake and asking for him, and the whole room seemed to exhale at once, the particular relief of a crisis finally arriving at its softer edges. The Admiral rose immediately, then paused at the door and turned back once more toward Delaney. Miss Marsh, Whatever else comes of tonight, my sister is going to want to thank you herself when she's steadier. I hope you'll let her." "I'd like that," Delaney said, and meant it, thinking of Grace's two raised fingers through a narrow window of glass, a small private language between two women who had decided together that today was not going to be the day either of their stories ended. The meeting broke up an hour later, past midnight, the hospital finally settling into the low, exhausted quiet that came after a crisis had passed and left everyone in it slightly changed. Priya caught Delaney's arm in the corridor outside the conference room before she could get far, eyes red-rimmed but her expression somewhere between awe and something gentler. "Wraith," Priya said, testing the word the way Knox had tested it hours earlier, though with considerably less suspicion and considerably more wonder. "I named my anxiety calendar after Preston Hale's ego, and it turns out I've been getting coffee with an actual former Special Operations combat medic for 3 months. "You've been getting coffee with a nurse who happens to have an unusual resume," Delaney said. "The coffee part hasn't changed." "The coffee part better not change," Priya said, and pulled her into a quick, fierce hug that Delaney had not expected and did not resist. For what it's worth, calm and quiet and always fixing everybody's mistakes without complaint, that's still the person I like getting coffee with. Turns out she's also terrifying in a stairwell bonus, honestly. I'll take that as a compliment." It absolutely was one. Priya squeezed her arm once more before letting go, glancing back toward the conference room where Crane was still gathering her legal pad with the stiff, wounded dignity of someone whose evening had not gone at all the way she planned. "Go home, Delaney, sleep. I'll cover the rest of your rounds. You've earned exactly 1 night of somebody else doing the fixing." Knox caught Delaney in the hallway outside, alone this time, the rest of his team already dispersing to hand off the scene to Norfolk PD and federal investigators who would spend the next several days untangling exactly who had hired the men in the stairwell and why. "For what it's worth," he said, "I've served with operators who couldn't do what you did today. Moving through a live threat with 2 civilians in tow and not losing your composure once. I don't say that lightly." "You don't strike me as a man who says much lightly," Delaney said. "No," Knox agreed, and something almost like a smile pulled at one corner of his mouth, brief, unpracticed, gone almost as soon as it appeared. "I don't." He was quiet for a moment, studying her in a way that felt different from the assessing, tactical looks he had given her earlier in the day, something a little less like a soldier evaluating an asset, and a little more like a man simply looking at a person he found he wanted to keep looking at. "You know, when I first walked into that scrub room this afternoon, I clocked you as competent and moved on," he said. "Competent civilians happen occasionally in trauma bays. It's rarer than people think, but it happens. It wasn't until the stairwell that I realized I'd been underestimating you the exact same way your Dr. Hale had been underestimating you for months, just with better manners about it." "At least you asked before you decided," Delaney said. "That's more than he ever did. My detail rotates out at the end of the week, once Ms. Whitcomb's transferred to a secure facility for recovery. But Norfolk's a small town, and Tidewater's not going anywhere. I imagine our paths might cross again." "I imagine they might," Delaney said, and did not look away from him the way she had spent 3 months looking away from everyone at this hospital, and for just a moment something passed between them that neither of them had a name for yet, and neither of them tried to force into one. "For what it's worth," Knox said, quieter now, "I'd like it if they did. Cross again, I mean, not just professionally." "Careful, Knox," Delaney said, but there was warmth in it now, the first real warmth she had let herself show all day that wasn't reserved for a frightened child or a woman bleeding out on a gurney. "I've been told I'm not an easy person to get coffee with." "I've been shot at twice today," Knox said. "Coffee sounds like the easiest thing I've done all year." He nodded once, a gesture that carried more respect in it than anything Dr. Hale had managed to summon in an entire day, and walked off down the corridor toward the rest of his team, glancing back once, before he turned the corner, just long enough for Delaney to catch it, and let herself smile at the ceiling for exactly 1 private second after he was gone. Delaney stood alone in the hallway for a moment, in scrubs still a size too big, hair coming loose from its ponytail, hands finally completely still, not from hiding anything anymore, but because there was nothing left in that moment that needed hiding at all. Down the hall, a nurse she didn't recognize was walking a patient to the bathroom, and a monitor beeped steadily in an empty room, and the ordinary machinery of the hospital had already begun grinding back into its normal rhythm. As if nothing extraordinary had happened here at all, but something had. She had walked into Tidewater Naval Medical Center 3 months ago trying to disappear, curved shoulders, and a voice pitched low, and eyes that never quite lifted all the way to meet anyone else's, building a version of herself small enough that nobody would ever think to ask what she used to be. Tonight she had stood in a conference room and said the word wraith out loud to a room full of people who mattered, and the ceiling had not fallen in. And the life she had built here had not shattered the way she always feared it would, if anyone ever really looked at her. It had simply widened quietly to make room for the truth. Milo would go home in the morning with his cast, his sticker, and a story about a bravest hallway that his mother would probably tell at every family dinner for years to come. Priya would keep her calendar, though the entries on it from tonight forward would likely look very different than the ones that came before. Dr. Hale would show up to his first training session sheepish and overdressed, and, Delaney suspected, genuinely trying. Grace Whitcomb would wake fully in a day or two and ask in person for the name of the woman who had kept both fingers raised and her own blood in her body, and Delaney would give it to her honestly this time, no smaller version required. And somewhere down a Norfolk hallway that neither of them had a name for yet, a Navy SEAL named Knox was probably already looking up the nearest coffee shop that stayed open late. She was never the fragile one in the room. She was the one holding it together, and for the first time in 2 years, she let herself believe that other people finally understood the difference. The end. If this story stayed with you, follow Silent Badge's stories and turn on notifications, because the next nurse walking quietly through a hospital hallway might be hiding a story even bigger than this one, and you will not want to miss the moment it comes out.